Nobody saw it coming. Ellen threw a jab, smug and casual, like she always does. But what happened next? Karoline didn't just clap back, she shut the room down. Cameras were rolling. Ellen's smirk, gone. Karoline's words, cold, precise, unforgettable. This wasn't just a comeback, it was a public takedown, and Ellen felt every second of it. And the best part? She wasn't ready for it at all. What did Karoline say that changed everything? You're about to find out. They were both smiling, cameras rolling, audience cheering. But no one knew, absolutely no one, that this was about to be the most uncomfortable moment in talk show history. It started like any regular Ellen interview. The lights were bright, the mood was light, and Ellen had her signature playful tone on full blast. Karoline, young, wildly talented, and fresh off a string of breakout performances, sat across from her, polite but confident. She wasn't there to play games. What she didn't expect, Ellen came armed with shade and zero subtlety. See, what the viewers didn't know is that Karoline had already been warned. Ellen had a reputation behind the scenes. She'll laugh with you, then laugh at you. That was the line whispered by more than one former guest. But Karoline? She wasn't new to being underestimated. She grew up having to clap back without clapping her hands. Now here's where it gets wild. Ellen throws what she thinks is a harmless joke, an offhand comment about Karoline's past that she twists into a punchline. The crowd gives a half laugh, that awkward type where people aren't sure if it's okay to laugh or not. Karoline smiles, tilts her head slightly, and for a second, it looks like she's letting it slide. But no, Karoline had receipts, she had experience, and above all, she had composure. Because what Ellen didn't know is that Karoline had come prepared, not just with charm, not just with grace, but with that razor-sharp ability to call out disrespect and make it look classy. The moment was seconds away now. Ellen had just crossed the line. And Karoline? She was about to take over the room. With a single response, she was going to turn that staged smile into a stunned silence. The kind of silence that hits right after someone says what everyone was thinking, but didn't dare say out loud. Because here's the thing about underestimating someone. You better be sure they don't have the mic next. And Karoline? She had it, and she knew exactly what to do with it. Stay with me, because the next 5 minutes, you won't believe what she said or how she flipped the whole vibe with just a few sentences. And then, there it was, a pause, a blink. The smile on Karoline's face didn't drop, but something in her eyes changed, like she had just made a decision. The kind of decision that doesn't come from anger, but from experience, from years of holding it in, from knowing the difference between staying silent and standing tall. Ellen had just cracked the second joke. This one wasn't veiled. It wasn't playful. It was personal. A sly dig at Karoline's family, something that had no business being brought up, especially on live television. The crowd reacted, but not the way Ellen expected. You know that sound an audience makes when they're not sure if they're supposed to laugh? That low murmur of discomfort? That's what hit the room. And Ellen, trying to keep control, let out a louder laugh, as if to say, "Come on, it's just fun." But Karoline didn't laugh. She adjusted her seat, smiled gently, looked Ellen dead in the eyes. And then she spoke, calmly, confidently, not loud, not dramatic, but every word sharp as a blade. She said, "You know, it's interesting how often people in power confuse humor with humiliation." Boom. The room froze. You could see the shift. Even Ellen's face twitched, just slightly, like she wasn't expecting that. Like for the first time on her own show, she wasn't holding the leash. Karoline didn't stop there. She leaned in just slightly, still graceful. "I've been through harder things than a talk show host trying to get laughs at my expense. If you wanted to talk about my work, I was ready. If you wanted to talk about real things, I was here for that too. But if you're here to reduce me to a punchline, you'll need better material." And just like that, the room turned. The audience, unsure at first, started to clap. Not the light applause that comes from obligation. This was different. This was people recognizing strength. Quiet, intelligent, poised strength. Ellen tried to recover, threw in a laugh, changed the topic. But it was too late. The shift had already happened. And Karoline? She sat back, relaxed, like someone who had nothing to prove, but everything to protect. That was the moment. The exact moment the power dynamic flipped on national television. When a guest took back her dignity in front of millions, not by shouting, not by storming off, but by being unshakably herself. And here's what's wild. That clip? It went viral within hours, not because it was dramatic, but because it was real. People were tired of watching interviews where vulnerability gets mocked for entertainment. Karoline's moment hit different. It was raw, respectful, and unshakably powerful. So what happened next? Ellen, clearly rattled, tried to wrap the interview in the usual bubbly tone, but her timing was off. Her rhythm broke. Because when someone calls out the game, the rules change. And Karoline? She walked off that stage with her head high and a quiet smile. No mic drop, no need to brag. Because she didn't just survive that interview, she rewrote the script. And it all began the moment she decided that silence wasn't strength. Speaking up with grace was. Wait till you hear what happened behind the scenes right after, because that's where things got even messier. You know those moments when someone pretends everything's fine, but you can feel the tension crawling through the air like static? That was this. The cameras were still rolling, the lights still blinding, the studio audience still smiling on cue, but under all of that, something was boiling. After Karoline calmly dismantled Ellen's cheap jab, things should have smoothed over. Most guests would have taken the high road, nodded politely, and let it go. But Karoline wasn't here to play the game by Ellen's rules. And Ellen? Oh, she wasn't used to that. So what did she do? She doubled down. Trying to regain control, Ellen slid into her usual fallback, sarcastic charm. She tossed out a comment that seemed light on the surface, but was laced with venom underneath. Well, Karoline, I guess you really came prepared with your PR answers today. Did your team rehearse that one with you backstage? The smile didn't reach her eyes. The audience laughed again, awkwardly this time. Some folks clapped just because they weren't sure what else to do. But Karoline? She didn't blink. Instead, she replied, cool and steady. No, Ellen. I've just had a lifetime of dealing with women who use kindness as a mask for cruelty. So I guess you remind me of home. Boom. That wasn't just a clapback. That was a truth bomb wrapped in velvet. And in that second, the whole tone of the show changed. Ellen's eyes narrowed, the control she usually held so tightly, slipping. The crowd was no longer with her the way they used to be. She knew it. You could see it, that slow realization that she was losing her grip on the room, and maybe more. She tried to laugh it off again. Wow, you're really bringing the heat today, huh? Did I strike a nerve? Karoline leaned forward, voice soft but firm. No, you poked at one. And I responded. That's called having a boundary, not being emotional. You ever hear silence so loud it makes your ears ring? That was the moment. The audience sat there, dead quiet. No laugh track, no applause, just stillness. Because what was happening wasn't entertainment anymore. It was confrontation, and it was real. What made it hit so hard? Karoline wasn't being angry, she wasn't shouting, she wasn't dramatic. She was calm, precise, and completely in control. That's what made Ellen squirm. Because bullies don't know what to do when their target doesn't flinch. And the clash didn't stop there. Ellen, visibly frustrated now, pulled out a card, literally. One of those cue cards with a pre-approved question. She glanced at it, rolled her eyes a bit, and said, well, let's shift to something lighter. I heard your latest film's doing well, even though it's not exactly Oscar material. Oof, a final jab. Passive-aggressive, backhanded, and meant to sting. Karoline paused, smiled again, then she looked right into the camera, not at Ellen, not at the crowd, at us, and she said, you know, I think it's important we talk about how often women get dismissed for being too ambitious or too outspoken, how quickly we get called too much when we're just not tolerating nonsense. So if being clear, smart, and successful makes someone uncomfortable, that's not my burden to carry. That's when the audience erupted, not in polite applause, in thunder, cheering, whistling, real, honest support. And Ellen, for the first time in a long time, she had nothing to say. Because the clash? It wasn't just between two women on a stage. It was between old media power dynamics and a new kind of courage. Karoline didn't come on that show to start a war. But when Ellen pushed, Karoline pushed back, with facts, with fire, and with elegance. That's what made it unforgettable. It was no longer an interview, it had become a mirror that showed how even powerful figures, when unchecked, can fall into the trap of disrespect masked as wit. And how those days might be numbered. And let me tell you, what happened during the commercial break after this segment, That's the part that never aired, but we've got the inside story. And that is where Ellen's regret really began. There's a moment in every tense exchange where things go from uncomfortable to unforgivable. And in this interview, that moment had a timestamp. By now, Karoline had already shown grace, wit, and calm under pressure. But Ellen, who had built an empire on being relatable while cloaking shade in smiles, was running out of cover. She wasn't hosting a show anymore. She was trying to win a fight, and then she crossed the line. Not just any line, the kind that splits awkward tension from public disaster. Here's how it happened. With the crowd already shifting toward Karoline, Ellen made one final attempt to steer the moment back in her favor. She smirked, glanced at Karoline, then tossed out a line that would instantly backfire. Well, not everyone's lucky enough to be handed a career just for looking a certain way. Pause. Let that sit for a second. The air got heavy. Audiences, both in the studio and later online, felt that punch. It was a calculated insult hidden behind fake humor. A not-so-subtle dig implying Karoline's success was based on appearance, not talent. And it didn't just challenge Karoline, it disrespected every woman who's had her achievements reduced to looks. You could hear the audience pull back, literally, a physical shift in the room. Even Ellen's most loyal fans watching at home tweeted things like, "That was low," and "This isn't funny anymore." But Karoline? She didn't flinch. She sat perfectly still for a beat, then looked Ellen square in the eyes, and with the kind of clarity that cuts deeper than any insult, she said, "You know what's wild? People like you pretend to champion women until one walks in that makes you uncomfortable. Then suddenly it's about what she looks like, not what she survived, not what she's built, not what she's earned." Ellen tried to laugh it off, but it didn't land. The crowd wasn't laughing. The camera didn't cut away, and Karoline wasn't finished. She continued, "You want the version of me that smiles, nods, and plays small, but I didn't come here to shrink so you could shine brighter." That line, you could feel it in your chest. Because this wasn't just about an interview gone wrong. This was about something much bigger. How women, especially strong, successful ones, are often punished the moment they stop being pleasant. And Karoline had just ripped the curtain wide open on it. Live. What happened next sealed the moment forever. Ellen, clearly rattled, shot back. "Well, I think you're overreacting. It was just a joke. You're taking this way too seriously. Sound familiar? The classic gaslight and dismiss tactic, one meant to silence, deflect, and regain control. But Karoline didn't budge. Instead, she leaned in, cool, calm, no raised voice, and dropped the line that would later be quoted across social media, news articles, even think pieces. "No, Ellen. What you call a joke is the reason so many women stop speaking up. Because when we do, we're labeled difficult, dramatic, overreacting. I'm not taking it too seriously. I'm taking myself seriously. And you should too." That was the shift. The audience exploded, not in that staged, cue card kind of way. This was raw. People stood up, clapped hard, cheered loud. Not for drama, but for truth. This wasn't just a comeback. It was a correction. On live TV, delivered with precision, without theatrics, and aimed straight at the double standards we've all seen but rarely get called out in real time. Ellen went silent. Not defensive, not witty, silent. And if you've ever watched her over the years, you know, that never happens. Behind the scenes, producers were panicking. You could almost hear the static in their earpieces as they whispered, cut to commercial, but they didn't. The moment was too real, too big, and that's when Karoline did something unexpected. She softened. She turned to the audience, not just in the studio, but through the camera, speaking directly to every girl, every woman, every person who's ever been dismissed. She said, "It's easy to laugh things off until you realize silence helps no one. If I'd stayed quiet, someone watching right now might think it's normal to be spoken to that way. It's not. Respect isn't optional. Meek, drop." The applause didn't stop for almost a full minute, and when the show finally did cut to commercial, Ellen sat there, eyes fixed ahead, hands folded, wordless. That line, about silence, about respect, about not shrinking, spread like wildfire. By the time the episode aired fully, Twitter was already trending. Karoline was right. Ellen crossed the line. Not just a laugh and the aftermath. Oh, it was messy. Not for Karoline. She walked out of that studio stronger than ever. But for Ellen, let's just say, the real regret hadn't even begun yet. Because what happened after this segment pulled back the curtain on a lot more than a single bad interview. It cracked open the whole system Ellen had built. And the next part? That's where the real storm hit. The cameras had cut, the crowd was buzzing. And Karoline? She walked off that stage with the kind of calm you only see in people who know they've just shifted something bigger than a room. They've shifted a conversation. But what happened after that viral moment didn't stay confined to one episode. No, the real show began after the credits rolled. Backstage, Ellen's team was scrambling. Phones lit up, emails started flying in. What just happened? Why didn't we stop that segment? Who approved the script? Producers who once wore smug grins now looked like they were sitting in a fire drill with no exits, because they knew this wasn't just an awkward exchange. It was a cultural fault line, and it just cracked wide open, live, in HD, with millions watching. And Karoline? She didn't go straight to social media. No dramatic tweets, no live-streamed expose. She didn't need to, because the internet did it for her. Within hours, that clip was everywhere. Not just on fan pages, but on news networks, celebrity blogs, podcasts. Even morning talk shows that usually avoided anything messy suddenly couldn't shut up about what had happened. The headlines wrote themselves. Karoline calls out. Ellen on air. Was she right? Ellen's power dynamic just got checked, and people are here for it. A new era of accountability just entered the chat. But it wasn't just news. It was the comment sections that told the real story. Women, young and old, flooded in with personal stories. Stories about being told they were too sensitive, or too pretty to be taken seriously, or too assertive to be likable. One tweet got over 600,000 likes. Karoline didn't just stand up for herself. She stood up for every woman who's ever had to smile through a backhanded compliment. And then came the shift. Again, Ellen, who had built her empire on a carefully crafted image of kindness, was suddenly facing questions she wasn't used to answering. People started pulling clips, old interviews, past moments, watching them through a new lens. Moments that once passed as light humor now looked different, sharper, colder, more calculated. It wasn't cancel culture. It was clarity. Because Karoline hadn't exposed a single moment, she had unlocked a pattern. Sponsors took note. One major brand that had partnered with Ellen's show released a statement about reevaluating values alignment. Code words, but the message was clear. Even some celebrities, usually silent when controversy brews, chimed in. One actress posted, "I've sat on that couch. I've smiled through things I shouldn't have. Watching Karoline, I wish I had spoken up." That one hit hard. Ellen's team tried to course correct. A carefully worded Instagram post appeared 2 days later. It said something about misunderstandings, tone, and learning moments. But by then, the tide had turned, because Karoline hadn't needed to go low to make her point. She'd stayed poised, authentic, and brutally honest, and that made all the difference. Meanwhile, Karoline's following exploded. Her interview bookings tripled within a week. A major magazine called her the new standard of fearless femininity. And the hashtag number Karoline Unfiltered started trending, not because of some marketing stunt, but because people wanted more of her. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Karoline didn't weaponize the moment. She didn't start gloating or dragging Ellen on every platform. In fact, when a journalist asked her if she'd go back on Ellen's show, she replied, "I don't need a sequel. The lesson already landed." That wasn't pettiness. That was power. Because true power isn't loud. It's clear. And Karoline had been crystal. Now, behind the scenes, Ellen was feeling it. Her team was pushing her to do damage control, maybe even invite Karoline back for a reconciliation segment. But the public wasn't buying apologies anymore. They were watching actions, and those actions were showing cracks in a brand once thought untouchable. This moment became a mirror, not just for Ellen, but for every industry giant that thought charisma could cover cruelty, or that fame could excuse a lack of respect. Karoline didn't just win an argument, she lit a signal fire for fairness, for dignity, for anyone who's ever been told to stay silent to keep things comfortable. The aftermath of that moment wasn't destruction, it was reconstruction, a shift toward truth, where grace didn't mean weakness, and confrontation didn't mean chaos. And whether Ellen ever fully owned that moment or not, the impact had already outgrown her studio walls. The audience had seen the truth, and once people see it, there's no going back. The clip didn't just trend, it exploded. By the end of the first day, it had clocked over 18 million views across platforms. But that wasn't the real headline. The real story was what happened when that moment, Karoline calmly dismantling Ellen's fake friendly mask, hit the national nerve. TV networks were cutting into scheduled programming. Talk shows were reshuffling guests just to bring this story to the front. News anchors who'd never mentioned Ellen without a smile were now asking questions and doing it out loud, and the biggest shift? This wasn't just about two women on a stage anymore. It was about us. Radio hosts were taking calls. Have you ever been in Karoline's shoes? The lines stayed jammed. Callers poured in. Mothers, students, corporate women, even retired professionals. One woman's voice cracked as she said, "I saw myself in her. The fake smiles I've given to survive. I felt seen. For the first time in years." That's when it clicked. This wasn't a scandal. This was a reckoning. Even late-night comedians got involved. But they weren't making jokes about Karoline. They were playing the clip, pausing it, and saying, "You see this face? This is the face of someone who's had enough." One even added, "She didn't raise her voice once. That's not weakness. That's years of built-up strength." Meanwhile, think pieces started flooding major publications. The New York Times ran with "The Ellen Showdown, When Nice Gets Called Out." An op-ed in The Atlantic wrote, "Karoline's calm courage may have just redefined the rules of public discourse." Even Forbes asked, "Is emotional intelligence the new currency in entertainment?" But here's the twist. Ellen had been untouchable for so long. Her brand was built on warmth, humor, and dance moves. So for someone to challenge her and come out respected, that made America stop and reevaluate. People began sharing old Ellen moments online, side by sides. One tweet said, "We laughed before. Now I'm wondering, were we laughing at the expense of someone's dignity?" That tweet alone had over 700,000 likes in 2 days. And politicians, you know it's real when they jump in. One senator tweeted, "When women speak up, especially in spaces they're told to stay quiet, it's not a meltdown, it's bravery." The ripple effect hit corporate America next. HR departments started circulating internal memos about empathy-based communication. One company even booked Karoline for a private talk, titled, "Respecting Voice Without Performance." That's how far it went. From daytime talk show to boardrooms. Universities brought it into classrooms. Media professors were analyzing Karoline's composure, her posture, her delivery. One lecturer wrote on his blog, "She gave a masterclass in dismantling power while still respecting the platform. It's rare. It's needed." Meanwhile, on the ground, protests weren't happening, but conversations were. In salons, cafes, subways, comment sections, classrooms, mothers were telling daughters, "Watch how she handled herself." Teenagers were saying, "That's the kind of confidence I want." It wasn't a viral moment, it was a teaching moment. And through it all, Karoline stayed silent. Not because she didn't have anything to say, but because the world was finally speaking for her. And that silence? It spoke louder than any response Ellen's team could draft. Because Karoline didn't just win an argument. She shifted the cultural current. And when a single moment causes an entire nation to question what they accept, what they laugh at, and who they protect, that's not just a response. That's a reset. Karoline didn't plan for this. She didn't walk onto that stage thinking she'd start a cultural shift. She was booked for a segment, not a movement. But sometimes life doesn't ask for your permission. It just hands you the mic. And Karoline? She spoke. The day after the confrontation, her inbox was flooded, but not just with praise, with offers. Agents who once ghosted her were now circling back like loyal fans. Book publishers, streaming platforms, campaign managers. Even a global cosmetics brand offered her a deal. Tagline, "Unfiltered Grace." But Karoline didn't jump. She waited. She watched. She knew how fast the world builds you up just to rip you apart, so she stayed quiet and strategic. Her first move? A single Instagram post, no caption. Just a black and white still of her on Ellen's stage, sitting calm while Ellen's face showed visible discomfort. The image went viral. Again, people called it iconic. Some even dubbed it the calm before the cultural storm. But what Karoline did next proved this wasn't a lucky moment. It was a calculated rise. Instead of running to the biggest interview, she chose a small, respected podcast known for honest storytelling. No flashing lights, no script. And when the host asked, "Did you expect the world to react this way?" Karoline smiled and replied, Not at all. But I've been waiting to be heard for a long, long time. Maybe people just finally listened. That line hit hard because it wasn't rehearsed. It was real. From there, the dominoes didn't fall. They lined up perfectly. Public speaking invitations flooded in, but Karoline only picked a few. Not the loudest stages, but the ones where her voice wouldn't be turned into a headline, where it would be understood. She showed up at a youth summit and told a group of 19-year-olds, never confuse silence with weakness. Sometimes, it's just someone waiting for the right moment. She wasn't just becoming famous, she was becoming important. And here's the kicker. She did it without clapping back. No diss tracks, no snarky tweets, no tell-all YouTube videos. She didn't build her brand on Ellen's downfall. She built it on her own rise. Her YouTube channel launched 2 weeks later, but it wasn't what people expected. Instead of ranting, Karoline uploaded thoughtful, honest content. The first video was titled, "When You're Tired of Performing Strength." She talked about pretending to be okay in toxic spaces, about holding your tongue to keep your job, and you could feel it. She wasn't acting. She was finally breathing. That video hit 3.2 million views in 5 days. Comments flooded in. She's not loud, but she's powerful. This is the voice I didn't know I needed. She speaks like someone who's been quiet for too long. Karoline wasn't just trending, she was connecting. A month later, Time magazine released their annual list, 100 Women Reshaping the Future. Karoline's name was there. And under it, for speaking softly in a world that rewards noise. She didn't seek revenge, she sought purpose. And in doing so, Karoline became more than a clapback queen. She became a symbol for those who were overlooked because they didn't shout, for those who were underestimated because they were kind, for those who've had to carry themselves with grace while walking through fire. Because when the world finally saw Karoline, not as a guest on someone else's stage, but as the main act on her own, something changed. She didn't need to destroy Ellen. She eclipsed her. And the light around Karoline, it wasn't built from backlash. It was built from truth, spoken quietly, carried boldly, and felt by millions. You just witnessed a masterclass in staying composed when the world expected chaos. Karoline didn't raise her voice, she raised the standard. In a time where outrage wins clicks, she showed us that intelligence, restraint, and self-respect can win hearts. Now here's where you come in. If Karoline's calm strength made you pause, if her grace under pressure made you rethink how power really looks, then this is your moment too. Don't just scroll away. Share this story with someone who's been silenced, dismissed, or doubted. Someone who needs to see that staying true to yourself is not a weakness, it's a weapon. And if you're tired of noise drowning out the truth, make sure this video isn't the end of the conversation. It's the start of one. Because the next time someone underestimates quiet strength, they should remember Karoline. And maybe, just maybe, they'll think twice before mistaking silence for surrender. So go ahead, keep the story moving, pass it forward, and never forget. Sometimes the loudest message is delivered without raising your voice at all.